The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell. Chapter 2. The Mermaid. After the mermaid had lived with the hunter for a while, he forgot that he had ever lived alone. The mermaid slept by him every night, but on top of the bearskin, not underneath it. She was used to the cold sea. And the bearskin on the bed, even the deerskins and the sealskins on the floor, weren't as smooth as the water she had always waked or slept in. She would run her hand over the softest fur, wrinkle up her nose and say, "It's rough." But most of all, she wanted the bed to rock. "It just stays still," she said disappointedly. The hunter made her a chair like a low, heavy table with two rockers underneath, and she would rock back and forth in it and stare at the fire. She loved the fire. The first time she ever saw it, she said, "Oh, oh," went over to it and started to pick up one of the red coals. The hunter ran to her and pulled her away, but it was hard to make her understand. He had to put her hand close to the flames and let her almost burn herself before she believed him. She put her fingers in her mouth, licked them, and then took them out and looked at them with a puzzled look. She said, "I didn't know there was anything like that." "Oh, no, once there was. I touched an eel, a queer one, and it was like it." She pointed to the coal, laughed, and said, "I thought it was a red shell, the best I ever saw. I was going to put it on the wall." Most of the plants under the sea are brown and green, and the bright things there are shells and fish. She would say, praising something, "It's like a shell." The first morning she looked over the meadow and saw the spring flowers, she cried, "Look, look, there are shells all over the meadow." She loved flowers and said that the birds, when they sang that first spring, sounded like flowers. "Gulls don't sing. They bark," she told the hunter. He had told her one night that the noise the foxes made was barking. "Once, when I'd swum to the beach, I heard a bird sing like that in the forest. But just once," she said. Now, when she listened to the birds, she would sing after them in a low voice, almost under her breath. She loved the look of the fire, but she hated anything cooked over it. She ate nothing but raw fish, fish she herself had swum after and caught. When one was particularly appetizing, she couldn't resist offering the hunter a bite. "It's so good when you don't burn it in the fire," she would say. She helped the hunter with the cooking, as a husband helps his wife. When he had gone out to hunt and left something to stew, she would take the pot off the fire. But she never knew when to take it off. Sometimes the meat was hard, and sometimes it was cooked to pieces, and she never got it right except by accident. But when the accident happened, the hunter would laugh and say, "You're as good a cook as my mother." Well, after all, why should he want her to keep house? If you had a seal that could talk, would you want it to sweep the floor? The mermaid loved to bring the hunter shells and starfish and seahorses and things from a wrecked ship at the bottom of the sea. Sometimes when she had brought him something new, she would stare at everything old for an hour and then rearrange half the things in the house. Once she brought the hunter something hidden in her hands, told him to shut his eyes, and then, getting it caught in his hair and beard, slipped it down over his head. "All right," she said. "Now you can open your eyes." When he opened them and looked down on his chest, the hunter saw gold and green and blue stones. A necklace. He was so surprised that he almost said, "Men don't wear necklaces." But instead, he kissed the mermaid, turned the necklace around and around in his hands, and told her it was the best gift he had ever had. She said happily, "You can find anything down in the sea. The ships sail over us for a while, but at last they sink. In the end, everything comes to us." The best thing she brought them was a ship's figurehead they put up over the door. It was all covered with barnacles and clams and mussels, but when they had scraped those off, you could see the paint even. It was a woman with bare breasts and fair hair who clasped her hands behind her head. She wore a necklace of tiny blue flowers and had a garland of big flowers around her thighs. But her legs and feet weren't a woman's at all, but the furry, delicate, sharp-hooved legs of a deer or goat, and they were crossed at the ankles, as if the bowsprit that she held up with her head were no weight at all for her. Her cheeks were rosy, as if the wind of the ship's sailing had flushed them, and her blue eyes stared out past you at something far away. More even than she hated cooked things, the mermaid hated anything sweet. Once, the hunter persuaded her to try some berries. She sniffed uncertainly at them, put them in her mouth, and then spat them out, exclaiming, "They're ugly, ugly, all gummy and blurry. How can you eat them?" But honey was the worst of all. She said, "It's like berries, only it chokes you too. In all my life, I've never tasted anything as bad." She drank salt water always. When she tried to drink the fresh water the hunter drank, she said, "Water doesn't taste much, but your water doesn't taste any. It's hollow." When she came from the sea to the house, she would leave a trail of crushed grass and flowers through the meadow, and she would smell of them for a while. But she herself had a sharp salt smell, like the spray of a wave as it breaks across your face. Her blue eyes and her dark skin shone, and her teeth, when she smiled, were as white as foam. At first, she had thought the hunter's clothes part of him, and said in astonishment, "I thought you were brown and gray, but you're white. You're prettier when you're white." For a long time, whenever the hunter took off his clothes, she would laugh as if he were playing a trick on her, something magical but ridiculous. He would explain to her how useful and beautiful clothes are. She listened always with the same willing, doubtful smile. She would have liked to be fooled, but it was more than she could manage. The hunter was the one clothed thing in a naked world. No matter how cold it was, she never wore any clothes herself. Sometimes she would take a red fox fur and tie it around her wrist for a bracelet. And because once, out on the seal rocks, she had put a wreath of seaweed on her head, the hunter carved her one out of myrtle wood with leaves and berries almost like the real ones. She wore it at dinner sometimes. When it rained, the hunter stayed inside. He would carve something, or sharpen his axe, or make himself arrows, or do housework, or play games with the mermaid to keep himself from being bored. The mermaid couldn't understand why he wanted to be inside when it rained. To her it made no difference. One day, when he came in after being caught in a hard rain, she said to him, touching the sodden leather of his shirt, "It's because you wear clothes. The rain gets them all cold and heavy. If you didn't wear clothes, you wouldn't mind the rain." Nor could she understand why he got bored. She never understood even what it meant to be bored. She said, "If you're tired of doing something, why, you can do something else. But why do you have to do something?" She would lie curled up in the window seat. They had a big window of glass and wood from a ship, and a window seat by it, all full of furs, and would look out at the sea, or doze, or just be. She never seemed to feel that she needed to say anything. She would sit silent for hours, and then answer him when he said something with as much animation as if she had been talking all the time. Sometimes her saying nothing, doing nothing, troubled the hunter. "What are you thinking?" he would ask. Now and then the mermaid told him, but usually she would answer with her old, "Oh, well," and the little indifferent wrinkling of her nose that with her was the equivalent of a shrug. The hunter and the mermaid played checkers and jackstraws and a game like horseshoes, throwing rings over a stake. But they quit the ring game because the mermaid missed so seldom. When once in 20 or 30 times the ring would bounce off the stake, she would laugh and say perplexedly, "I did it wrong. I don't understand it. I did it wrong." But whenever anything went wrong, she laughed and thought it was funny. Once, shifting the horn and the shells over the mantel, she fell and dented the horn, broke 2 shells, and knocked the breath out of herself. And as soon as she got her breath back, she began to laugh. It was almost the only time the hunter had seen her lose her breath. She could hold her breath for half an hour, like a whale or a dolphin. She would do it to amuse him, occasionally pointing to her closed mouth and narrowed nostrils. And she could balance herself on anything, juggle with anything, like a seal. She learned the hunter's language so well that at last she thought in it, except when she was in the water. "When the water touches me, I think the way I always thought," she said. She taught the hunter a little more of her own language, but it was hard for him to say. When she spoke it, it was like water, gurgling in a cleft in the rock. But whatever she said sounded like that. She had learned the hunter's words, but she said them to the sea's tune. She taught the hunter to say in dolphin and seal, in case he were ever swept to sea, "Help me! Help me to the beach!" Learning that sentence in dolphin was the hardest thing the hunter had ever done. He told her indignantly, "You have to say it with the roof of your mouth and your nose, and so high you can't even hear yourself say it." "That's right. That's right," said the mermaid. "Now you're getting it." She liked dolphin and looked down on seal. "Dolphins say as much as the people say," she told the hunter. "But most of the words in dolphin are too high for us. We can't say them." But seals don't say much. Seal is easy. You can learn all the seal there is in a week." The hunter would tell her about his father and mother and the years the three of them had lived there. There was a thin, square piece of lace left from those years, the mother's handkerchief. To the hunter and the mermaid, it was a great treasure. "How did they ever make all those little holes in it?" she asked the hunter. But he didn't know. The mermaid tried to imagine what their life had been like, but it was hard for her. "You're the only man I've ever seen," she said, "except drowned ones." So he carved for her, out of walnut, a statue of his father and a statue of his mother. When she saw his mother's long skirts, she said, "Why, she's like me." But when she saw the carving of his father, she laughed and laughed. "You didn't have to do that one," she said. The hunter didn't know what she meant, or why she laughed, and looked at her uneasily and disappointed, so that she kissed him and said, "It's just like you. There's no difference at all. It's just like you." She would tell him the sea people's stories, and he would tell her the fairy tales his mother had told him. When he said nursery rhymes to her, she would laugh as if she were being tickled. She loved to be tickled. "I like it when it sounds the same," she said. "Show me how to make it sound the same myself." After a while, she knew all the nursery rhymes by heart. Sometimes on a stormy day, working away at something, the hunter would look up to hear what she had said, and she would be lying there looking out at the waves, saying softly, "Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock." Whenever anything reminded the hunter of his father and mother, you could see that he missed them and longed to have them alive again. The mermaid would tell him about her childhood and her family and her sister, the dead one. But she never seemed to want any of it back. The hunter said, puzzled, "Don't you wish your sister were still here?" The mermaid answered, "She was then. Why do you want her to be now, too?" The hunter remembered that he had never seen the mermaid cry. He thought with a little shiver, "Do mermaids cry?" The only things the mermaid was afraid of were big sharks and killer whales. "They kill us if they catch us," she told him. But she was afraid of them in a matter-of-fact, indifferent way, and said that none of her people really thought about them or hated them. "Why should we?" she said. "They eat us the way we eat fish. The fish don't hate us. They swim next to us when they know we're not hungry, and when we're hungry they get away from us if they can. Everything lives on everything." At first she would say, "I'll go home," when she went back to visit her family. But after a while, she called the house with the hunter home. The first day she was back from the sea, she would lie in the window seat and shift back and forth and shake her head with a puzzled look. She told the hunter, "In the sea everything moves, And when I come back to where it's all still, it makes me dizzy. Everything seems to roll back and forth. I can't get it to stay still. In a little, she laughed and said, "When I tell them about home, they don't believe it. They don't believe we have a fire. I tell them, but they don't believe in fire. I show them how it lights our window at night. But they think it's like the waves in summer when they shine, or like a star." The hunter and the mermaid were so different from each other that it seemed to them, finally, that they were exactly alike. And they lived together and were happy.